Good morning, everybody! Welcome back to my channel. My name is Kris, this is Wizard Way, and welcome back to Silmarillion Saturdays, where I read the Silmarillion and related texts so that you don't have to. Today is a continuation of last week's stream, so we are reading The Lays of Beleriand, which is book 3 in the History of Middle-earth series. This is primarily Tolkien's poetry, Middle-earth specific poetry. So last week we read the first portion of The Lay of the Children of Húrin. This is the poetic version, the epic poetry version, of the story of Turin Turambar. So if you are reading the Silmarillion, if you've watched my other live streams, Turin's story is quite involved and is one of the longer chapters of the Silmarillion. So, Tolkien has a couple of his favorite stories that he gave epic poems to. One of them is The Lay of Luthien, or The Lay of Leithian, which is what Aragorn is singing in the extended edition of The Fellowship of the Ring when he's taking the hobbits, not to Isengard, but to Rivendell the first time. So when he's off on his own singing in Elvish, he's singing The Lay of Leithian, which is about Beren and Luthien. So it's another big story from the Silmarillion that has a poetry form. We will eventually get to the Lay of Leithian. We're going to read that, and it's a doozy. It's a long one. But for now, I believe we have today and a couple more streams in order to finish the Children of Húrin, the Lay of the Children of Húrin. So that's what we're working on today. We're gonna read some poetry. Trying to wet my whistle so that I don't completely embarrass myself. And I hope you guys appreciated my last stream where I actually tried to put on weird accents for the trolls in The Hobbit. This is me smiling because I'm nervous. I hope it wasn't bad. Hey, Lord Bunnybone, what is up? Welcome. Welcome. I'm doing well. I actually had breakfast this morning before going live. This is a good thing. So, we're doing okay today. But yes, so let's take a look back at what we were reading last time, just to do a little quick review. Okay. Yes, just making sure that I had it right in my head, because I've done a few different streams in the past week. So as we left off last week, we were in Turin Turambar's childhood. So in Turin's childhood, in this version, we are looking at slightly different names for people. So in this version, the elf that's giving him a lot of grief while he's growing up in Doriath is named Orgof. Orgof. So Orgof is giving him grief, just giving him a lot of slack. You know, telling him his face is stupid. Like, honestly, kindergarten stuff. But it gets to Turin, and in this version, he basically shoves Orgof. And in doing so, Orgof flails and falls backwards, and he happens to hit his head on a stone and die. So, sorry, TikTok, and unalive himself. Oops. So, this is what happens with Orgof. I believe his name in the proper Silmarillion is Sauron. Yeah, I think it's Sauron. So, in the Silmarillion version, Sauron is, like, hunted down. Turin gets so mad at him, he, like, hunts him down. And while he is fleeing, fearing for his life, Sauron jumps over a portion of the river that is kind of cliffy with rocky rocks, with sharp, pointy rocks at the bottom, and he falls and dies. So, either way, this character passes, and Turin is like, I caused this. Now, in the Silmarillion, it's less sympathetic. He's like, I caused this. And we're like, yeah, you really kind of did, bro. Like, you need to keep that temper in check. So in the Silmarillion, he exiles himself. And it's sort of understandable when you have actively pursued a person and caused their death. Versus in this is an earlier version, the poetry version is an earlier version of the story. In the poetic version, the character just falls backwards and happens to hit his head, it's bad luck, and he dies, and Turin overreacts by being like, oh my god, I did this horrible thing, I deserve to be exiled, and he just leaves. But Thingol, the king of Doriath, is just like, dude, like, it was an accident. Everybody here knows this was an accident. You can come home. But Turin's like, no, I did a bad thing. So that's basically where we've left off, is Turin is putting himself in exile. So part 2 is entitled Beleg, so we are going to follow Beleg Cutharion, who is Turin's best friend. And these are, if you're queer like me, this is one of the couples that you tend to read as being more than just friends. Whether that becomes, you know, a platonic relationship, or a romantic relationship, or a sexual relationship, you know, Tolkien never says, but there is love between these two characters. That much is canonical. Beleg says, you know, Turin, you know, is the guy I love. He says that more than once. Now, we can read into that whatever we want, but that's where we're at. So we're going to be talking about Turin and his friend Beleg today. This is quite a long section, but we'll probably cover about as much as we did in the last stream. So the last stream was about 550 lines of poetry, and this one we're probably going for like 600 or 700, so. Just as a quick reminder, I keep forgetting to do this, so as a quick reminder, this particular poem is written in a format where it's a certain number of syllables. I believe it's 10 syllables per line, and then each line has a consonant or alliteration of some sort. So each line will have a sound that is repeated in that line. Now, the way that I recite the poetry, you might not always catch on to it for every single line, because I don't necessarily pause at the end of every line. Because if there's no punctuation mark, you're not meant to necessarily pause unless you want to for dramatic effect. So, for example, the first line is, "Long time alone he lived in the hills." So, you have the L sound being repeated in that line. And then, actually, the final word hills leads into the next line, which is, "A hunter of beasts and hater of men." So you have the ha, the H sound. So this is sort of how it works. Hello there, Winter Witch, what is up? Feel free to join over on my YouTube channel, where we are reading the Lays of Beleriand today. So this is Tolkien poetry. So every single line has its own sound that gets repeated, and each line tends to be 10 syllables. I could be wrong on that, but it tends to be 10 syllables. So without further ado, let me get a little more water and let's get started. Oh, I'm glad you liked the accents, my word. Ever since Maisie Matilda got on my butt about, like, a terrible British accent, I've been super self-conscious. I've been super self-conscious because I don't want to make Maisie mad. I don't want her to look at me and scowl and say, rubbish. And I'll be like... I'll just want to sink back into nothingness. So I'm glad the really terrible Welsh and Cockney combination came off okay during the Hobbit stream. We will definitely be covering more Hobbit. We are reading the Lays of Beleriand and the Hobbit simultaneously. So Lays of Beleriand we're covering on Saturdays, for Silmarillion Saturdays. And the Hobbit is Hobbit Hump Day, so every Wednesday. Hobbit Hump Day, because I could make the pun, so I did. There's gotta be a gimmick, right? Otherwise, why am I here? Alright, so here we go once again. The Lays of Beleriand, the Lay of the Children of Húrin. Part 2, Beleg. Long time alone he lived in the hills, a hunter of beast and hater of men, or orcs or elves, till outcast folk there one by one, wild and reckless around him rallied, and roaming far, they were feared by both foe and friend of old. For hot with hate was the heart of Húrin, nor a friend found him such folk of Thingol as he wandering met in the woods' fastness. So just saying that Turin wasn't making a lot of friends in Doriath. There Beleg the brave on the borders of Doriath they found and fought, and few were with him, and o'erborne by numbers they bound him at last till their captain came to their camp at eve. Afar from that fight, his fate that day had taken Turin on the trail of the orcs, as they hastened home to the hills of iron, with the loot laden of the lands of men. Then soon was him said that a servant of Thingol they had tied to a tree, and Turin coming stared astonied on the stern visage of Beleg the brave, his brother in arms, of whom he learned the lore of leaping blades, and of bended bow and barbed shaft, and the wild woodland's wisdom secret, when they blent in battle the blood of their wounds. So, brother in arms, Beleg taught Turin, like, how to fight. He's an old elf, and he's super knowledgeable. And his band of bandits that Turin has fallen in with since he self-exiled out of Doriath, basically got into a skirmish with the elves, and they tied Beleg to a tree, and he's like, wait a sec, I know this guy. Hello, Shanno, welcome. Hello, nurse. Speaking of hello, nurse, Beleg is one of the handsome characters, I feel. Beleg is an easy guy to like. I know, like, how rare is it that we catch each other live? We're on completely different schedules, you and I. Oh yeah, Strongbow is a fantastic character in Turin's story. We'll see how far we get in his tale here. Alright, so Turin's bandits have tied Beleg to a tree, and Turin is like, wait a sec, that's where we're at. Then Turin's heart was turned from hate, and he bade unbind Beleg the huntsman. Now fare thou free, but of friendship aught, if thy heart yet holds for Húrin's son. Never tell thou tale that Turin thou saw'st, an outlaw unloved from elves and men, from whom Thingol's thanes yet thirst to slay. Betray not my trust, or they troth of yore. So this is Turin speaking to Beleg. Then Beleg of the bow embraced him there. He had not fared to the feast or the fall of Orgoth. There kissed him kindly, comfort speaking. Lo, not know I of the news thou tell'st, but outlawed or honored, thou ever shalt be the brother of Beleg. Come bliss, come woe. Aww. Yet little me likes that thy leaping sword the life should drink of the leaguered elves. Are the grim Glamhoth then grown so few, or the foes of Faerie feeble-hearted, that warlike men have no work to do? Shall the foes of Faerie be friends of men? Betrayest thou thy troth, whom we trusted of yore? It's like, why are you attacking elves? Like, don't you have better things to do? Nor of armed orc, nor of elf of the wood, nor of any on earth have I honor or love, O Beleg the bowman. This band alone I count as comrades, my kindred in woe and friendless fate, our foes the world. So dramatic. Let the bow of Beleg to your band be joined, and swearing death to the sons of darkness, let us swage our sorrow and the smart of fate. Our valor is not yet vanquished, nor vain the glory that once we did in the woods of old. That's Beleg saying that. Thus hope in the heart of Hurin's offspring awoke at those words, and them well liked of that band, the boldest, save Blodrin only, Blodrin, Bor's son, who for blood and for gold alone lusted, and little he recked whom he robbed of riches or reft of life, were it elf or orc. But he opened not the thoughts of his heart. There throbbed the harp, where the fires flickered, and the flaming bands of pine were piled in the place of their camp, where glad men gathered in good friendship as dusk fell down on the drear woodland. Then a song on a sudden, soaring loudly, and the trees uplooming, towering, hearkened, was raised of the rack of the realm of the gods, and of the need of the gnomes on the narrow crossing. Oh my gosh. Of the fight at Fangros and Feanor's sons, oath unbreakable. So this is Beleg is singing by the firelight for them, and he's telling stories of the First Age, earlier in the First Age. Okay, and Feanor's son's oath unbreakable. Then up sprang Beleg, that our vaunt and our vows be not vain forever, even such as they swore, those 7 chieftains, an oath let us swear that is unchanging as Tyne Gwethil's towering mountain. Their blades were bared, as blood shining in the flame of the fires while they flashed and touched. As with one man's voice the words were spoken, and the oath uttered that must unrecalled abide forever, a bond of truth and friendship in arms, and faith in peril. Thus war was waked in the woods once more for the foes of Faerie, and it fame widely, and the fear of that fellowship now fared abroad. When the horn was heard of the hunting elves that shook the shaws and the sheer valleys, blades were naked and bows twanging, and shafts from the shadows shooting winged, and the sons of darkness slain and conquered. Even in Agband the orcs trembled. Then the word wandered down the ways of the forest that Turin Thalion was returned to war, and Thingol heard it, and his thanes were sped to lead the lost one in love to his halls. But his fate was fashioned that they found him not. Little gold they got in that grim warfare, but weary watches and wounds for guerdon. Nor on robber raids now rode they ever, who fended from Faerie the fiends of hell. So just to pause for a moment, basically, word of Turin and Beleg and their band, who is now basically sworn a blood oath to each other, word of their triumph over the orcs and other dark forces has reached the ears of King Thingol, who wants to welcome Turin back home, but whenever he sends messengers out to find him, Turin is not easily found. And that's another working of fate, which we see a lot of in Turin's story. At one point in the Silmarillion, he renames himself, Turin, being the dramatic hoe this guy is, he renames himself Bloodstained, Son of Ill Fate, in Elvish. Agarwine, son of Amarth, I believe it was, or son of Umarth. So fate plays a bit of a role in Turin's story, and this is definitely a time where it doesn't work in his favor, because Thingol would have welcomed him home, and if he had returned to Doriath, a lot of this drama that goes down would not have gone down. Okay. Okay, who fended from fairy the fiends of hell. Oh yeah, like, super dramatic. Hi, Papervein. So dramatic. Especially in the poetic form, like, oh my word. Melodramatic. Okay. But Blodrin bore's son for booty lusted, for the loud laughter of the lawless days, and meats unmeasured, and mead goblets refilled and filled, and the flagons of wine that went as water in their wild revels. So he's like, you guys are no fun at all. Now tales have told that trapped as a child, he was dragged by the dwarves to their deep mansions, and in Nogrod nurtured, and in naught was like spite, blood, and birth to the blissful elves. So this guy was basically raised by dwarves. Hi, Gray. Hi, are you joining us? Oh, cat. Nope, 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 nope. You can't go over there. I blocked it off today. Of course he messed with my camera. Go figure. Nope. Did you have to do that, Gray? Of course now it doesn't want to stay. There. Nope. Oh, man. Okay. I think we're good. I think we're good. We'll soon find out, I guess. Hey, Mikey, what's up? Welcome. Caught me right when my cat messed up my camera. At least my camera for TikTok. Anyone who's over on TikTok, please feel free to follow the link in my bio. Head over to my YouTube channel. That's where I need you guys to watch me, if you have the ability and will to do so. Excuse me. Okay, where were we? So this guy, his name is Blodrin. He was trapped as a child and raised by the dwarves. So he's very much not elf-like. So he probably doesn't relish the fact that he's fighting alongside an elf. Not side by side with a friend, if you will. His heart hated Hurin's offspring and the bowman Belig. So biding his while, he fled their fellowship and forest hidings to the merciless orcs, whose moon-pallid, cruel-curved blades to kill spare not. Then whose greed for gold none greater burns save in the hungry hearts of the hell dragons. He betrayed his troth. Traitor made him in the forest fastness of his fellows in arms. He opened to the orcs, nor his oath heeded. And my phone is doing weird stuff. Oh my gosh, okay. I'm getting sort of an emergency text from my mom. Okay, I'm gonna have to put things aside really quickly, respond to my mom, and I'll be right back. Sorry for the delay, you guys, but I'll put you on the BRB screen, and I'll take care of this as swiftly as possible and return. I should be able to do this with a phone call. I love you guys. I'll be right back, I promise. Okay, we're back. We're back. Sorry about that, guys. Computer issue, and my mom was freaking out. So, we're good. We're good to go. Sorry about that, guys. Let's continue. I'm like, wait, what were we talking about? Okay, so we were talking about Blodrin. Blodrin is Bor's son, and he was raised by dwarves, or so this says. Yeah, tales have told that trapped as a child, he was dragged by the dwarves to their deep mansions, and in Nogrod nurtured. Nogrod being one of the main dwellings of the dwarves in the Blue Mountains, which are on the far east side of Beleriand. So, it was Belagost and Nogrod were the two realms of great renown for the dwarves in the first stage. So, this guy has basically gone to the orcs and been like, hey guys, I kind of hate these people that I'm running with now. They've taken all the joy out of being a bandit. Like, we don't steal anymore, we don't party or revel, we don't rape, pillage, and plunder. Like, what's the point? So, he's not having a great time anymore, and so he's going to basically betray them. Hey, Yaksahiska! Hello! All the way from Morocco, thanks for tuning in! We're gonna continue with the poetry. Sorry that you had to wait there for a few minutes. My mom's okay. It was just technophobia. All right. Let me see. Where was I in the text here? Okay. Nor his oath heeded is what we had said. So he's not heeding his oath anymore. He's gonna betray them. There they fought and fell by foes outnumbered, by treachery trapped at a time of night when their fires faded and few were waking. Some wakened never, not for wild noises, nor cries, nor curses, nor clashing steel, swept as they slumbered to the slades of death. But Turin they took, though towering mightily at the huntsman's hand, he hewed his foeman. You many foemen. Okay, sorry. He hewed his foeman as a bear at bay mid bellowing hounds, unheeding his hurts. At the hest of Morgoth, yet living, they lapped him, his limbs entwining with hairy hands and hideous arms. Then Beleg was buried in the bodies of the fallen, as sorely wounded he swooned away. And all was over, and the orcs triumphed. The dawn over Doriath dimly kindled, saw Blodrin Bor's son by a beach standing with throat thurled by a thrusting arrow. Thurled, I've never seen that word before. By a thrusting arrow whose shaven shaft, shod with poison and feather winged, was fast in the tree. He bargained the blood of his brothers for gold, thus his meed was meted. In the murk at random, by an orc arrow, his oath came home. So basically, quite by accident, he gets shot by, at this point, friendly fire from the orcs, and gets killed by an arrow through the throat. It's not a good look. Hey, Larson! Good evening over in Sweden. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome once again. So, in a very short period of time there, we just covered Turin and Bella getting into a skirmish with orcs because one of their bandits betrayed them, and Turin gets taken captive because Morgoth has plans for him. And Beleg, they think, is dead, so he was piled in with all of the dead bodies of their comrades. Fun times. So that leaves us where we currently are. From the magic mazes of Melian the Queen, they hailed unhappy Hurin's offspring, lest he flee his fate. But they fared slowly, and the leagues were long of their labored way over hill and hollow to the high places, where peaks and pinnacles of pitiless stone, looming up lofty, are lapped in cloud, and veiled in vapors vast and sable. Where Eglir, Engrin, the iron hills, lie o'er the hopeless halls of hell, upreared rot at the roots of the roaring cliffs of Thangorodrim's thunderous mountain. Tongue twisters, man. Thither led they laden with loot and evil, but Beleg yet breathed in blood drenched, a swoon, till the sun to the south hastened, and the eye of day was opened wide. Then he woke and wondered, and weeping took him, and to Turin Thalion his thoughts were turned, that o'erborne in battle and bound he had seen. Then he crawled from the corpses that had covered him over, weary, wounded, too weak to stand. So Thingol's thanes, athirst and bleeding in the forest, found him. His fate willed not that he should drink the draught of death from foes. Thus they bore him back in bitter torment, his tidings to tell in the torchlit halls of Thingol the king, in the 1,000 caves, to be healed whole, by the hands enchanted of Melian Mablui, the moonlit queen. Arrowweek was outworn, his wounds were cured, but his heart's heaviness, those hands of snow nor soothed nor softened. And sorrow-laden he fared to the forest. So, within a week, Melian, being the amazing healer and Maya that she is able to bring him back from the brink of death. Ooh, I'm sorry you have a headache. Hopefully this helps. Hopefully all these tongue-twisty words help. I'll take that from you, and it'll probably hit me with a headache. These are tough poems to read. So, Beleg is feeling better. It's about a week later now. No fellows sought he in his hopeless hazard, but in haste alone he followed the feet of the foes of Elfland, the dread daring and the dire anguish that held the hearts of Heathlam's men and Doriath's doughtiest in a dream of fear. Unmatched among men, or magic-wielding elves, or hunters of the orc kindred, or beast of prey for blood pining, was his craft and cunning, that cold and dead and unseen slot could scent or stone, footprints could find on forest pathways that lightly on the leaves were laid in moons long waned, and washed by windy rains. The grim Glamhoth's goblin armies go cunning-footed, but his craft failed not to tread their trail, till the lands were darkened and the light was lost in lands unknown. Never-dawning night was netted clinging in the black branches of the beetling trees, oppressed by pungent pinewood's odors, and drowsed with dreams as the darkness thickened, he strayed steerless. The stars were hid and the moon mantled. There magic foundered in the gathering glooms. There goblins even, whose deep eyes drill the darkness shadows, bewildered, wandered, who the way forsook to grope in the glades. There greyly loomed of girth unguessed in growth of ages, the topless trunks of trees enchanted. That fathomless fold by folk of Elfland is Taur na Fuin, the trackless forest of deadly nightshade, dreadly named. Abandoned, beaten, there Beleg lying to the wind hearkened winding, moaning in bending boughs, to branches creaking up high overhead, where huge pinions of the plumed pine trees complained darkly in black foreboding. There, bowed hopeless, in wit wildered, and wooing death, he saw on a sudden a slender sheen shine a shimmering in the shades afar. Shine a shimmering in the shades afar. Like a glowworm's lamp a gleaming dim. He marveled that it might be as he moved softly, for he knew not the gnomes of need delving in the deep dungeons of dark Morgoth, unmatched their magic and metalworking, who jewels and gems that rejoiced the gods aforetime fashioned, when they freedom held, now swinking slaves of ceaseless labor in Angband smithies, nor ever were suffered to wander away, warded always. Meaning, he's thinking that this light might be coming from one of the Noldor who was captured in battle by Morgoth, and this is just saying that when elves are captured by Morgoth in the first stage, he doesn't tend to kill them. He puts them to work in his mines, in his smithies deep in the mountain. So he's thinking this might be one of those Noldor. And indeed, he's right. Okay, where were we? There we go. But little lanterns of lucent crystal and silver cold with subtlest cunning they strangely fashioned, and steadfast a flame burnt unblinking there, blue and pale, unquenched forever. The craft that lit them was the jewel-maker's most jealous secret. Not Morgoth's might, nor meed, nor torment them vowed, availed to reveal that lore. Yet lamps and lights of living radiance, many and magical, they made for him. No dark could dim them in deep's wandering. Those load they lit was lost seldom in groundless groat, or gulfs far under. These are very, very special lamps that the Noldor could make. 'Twas a gnome he beheld on the heaped needles of a pine tree pillowed. Then, peering wary, he crept closer. The covering pelt was loosened from the lamp of living radiance by his side shining. Slumber shrouded, his fear-worn face was fallen in shade. Lest in webs woven of unwaking sleep, spun round by spells in those places dark, he lie forlorn and lost forever. The hunter hailed him in the hushed forest. To the drowsy deeps of his dream profound, fear ever following, came falling aloud. Oh, it came falling loud? Fear ever following came falling loud. As the lancing lightning he leapt to his feet, full deeming that dread and death were upon him. Flinding Gofuilin, or Flinding Gofuilin. This is his name, is Flinding Gofuilin. This eventually in the Silmarillion is changed to Gwyndor, son of Gwilyn. So, Gwilyn, Fuilin, Tolkien changed this around a little bit. But in here his name is Flinding. Flinding Gofuilin, fleeing in anguish from the mines of Morgoth. Marveling, he heard the ancient tongue of the elves of Tun, and Beleg the bowman embraced him there, and learnt his lineage and luckless fate, how thrust to thraldom in a throng of captives, from the kindred carried and the cavernous halls of the gnomes renowned of Nargothrond. Long years he labored under lashes and flails of the baleful Balrogs, abiding his time. A tale he unfolded of terrible flight, or flaming fell and fuming hollow, or the parched dunes of the plains of drouth, till his heart took hope and his heed was less. Then Tower Nafuin entangled my feet. Oh, this is him speaking. Then Tower Nafuin entangled my feet in its mazes enmeshed, and madness took me that I wandered witless, unwary stumbling and beating the boles of the brooding pines in idle anger. And the orcs heard me. They were camped in a clearing, that close at hand by mercy I missed. Their marching road is beaten broad through the black shadows by wizardry warded from wandering elves. But dread they know of the deadly nightshade, and in haste only do they hie that way. Now cruel cries and clamorous voices awoke in the wood, and winged arrows from horny bows hummed about me, and following feet, fleet and stealthy, were padding and pattering on the pine needles, and hairy hands and hungry fingers in the gloom's groping, as I groveled fainting till they cowering found me. Fast they clutched me, beaten and bleeding, and broken in spirit they laughing led me, my lagging footsteps with their spears speeding. Their spoils were piled, and countless captives in that camp were chained, and elfin maids their anguish mourning. But one they watched, warded sleepless, was stern-visaged, strong, and in stature tall as are Heathlum's men of the misty hills. Full length he lay, and lashed to pickets in baleful bonds, yet bold-hearted, his mouth no mercy of Morgoth sued, but defied his foes. Foully they smote him. Then he called, as clear as cry of hunter that hails his hounds in hollow places, on the name renowned of that noblest king. But men unmindful remember him little. Húrin Thalion, who Erithamrod height? It's strange, the wording here. Húrin Thalion, who Erithamrod height, the unbending. For Orc and Balrog and Morgoth's might on the mountain yet he defies fearless, on a fanged peak of thunder-riven Thangorodrim. Can we appreciate how difficult this is to read? This is a challenge for me. Hey, Gondor Cult, what is up? Welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So that is the end of Gwyndor, or at least in here his name is Flinding. So Flinding is speaking there until the end of that. So he's basically saying that the orcs found him, and in their camp with all of these other prisoners chained up, he noticed one in particular who was very unusually tall. Like Heathlum's men, the elves of Heathlum tended to be on the taller side. So he's saying that he sees a prisoner there who's tall, like Heathlum's men, who is being guarded at all times. So no rest for the orcs with this one, and he keeps defying them and shouting curses at Morgoth. But the person that he, cries out to is his father, Húrin. But that's sort of telling, because not many people are followers of Húrin anymore. Because at this point, this is after the Nirnaeth Arnodiad, and that means that Húrin has been captured and put on the peak of Thangorodrim by Morgoth, which is what he was talking about at the end there. And most of Húrin's kin and followers have been slain at this point. Don't ask me how Flinding would know of Húrin, but, whatever. It makes more sense in the Silmarillion because Gwyndor, son of Gwilyn, being one of the princes of Nargothrond, he would have known who Húrin was. But here, it doesn't really give you too much context. I am reading from the Children of Húrin, but specifically the poetry version in the Lays of Beleriand. So, we are reading the Lays of Beleriand. It's a challenge. Every line has a sound that gets repeated. So every line is a certain number of syllables, and a sound repeats itself. So whether it's consonants, assonance, or alliteration, basically. Alright, next section, here we go. In eager anger, then up sprang Beleg, crying and calling, careless of Flinding. O Turin, Turin, my troth brother, to the brazen bonds shall I abandon thee, and the... Oh. This is a question, never mind. To the brazen bonds shall I abandon thee, on the darkling doors of the deeps of hell? Thou wilt join his journey in the jaws of sorrow, O bowman crazed, if thy bellowing cry to the orcs should come. Their ears, than cats, are keener whetted, and though the camp from here be a day distant, where those deeds I saw, who knows if the gnome they now pursue, that crept from their clutches as a crawling worm on belly cowering, whom they bleeding cast in deathly swoon on the dung and slough of their loathsome lair. O light of Valinor, and ye glorious gods, how gleam their eyes, and their tongues are red. That was Flinding speaking. And we now switch back to Beleg. Yet I, Turin, will wrest from their hungry hands, or to hell be dragged, or sleep with the slain in the shades of death. Thy lamp shall lead us, and my lore rekindle and wise woodcraft. Back to Flinting. O witless hunter, thy words are wild. Wolves unsleeping and wizardry ward their woeful captives, unerring their arrows. The icy steel of their curved blades cleaves unblunted the meshes of mail. The murk to pierce those eyes are able. The murk to pierce those eyes are able? Okay. Their awful laughter, the flesh freezes. I fare not thither, for fear fetters me in the forest of night. Better die in the dark, dazed, forewandered, than wilfully woo that woe and anguish. I know not the way. Are the knees then weak of Flinding Gofuilin? Shall freeborn gnome thus show himself a shrinking slave, who twice entrapped has twice escaped? Remember the might and the mirth of yore, and renown of the gnomes of Nargothrond. It's Beleg trying to encourage him to come with them. Because Flinding's just like, I don't want to. Like, I've been wandering around like a madman in here for a while already. I'd much rather just, like, die trying to find my way out rather than court disaster and go attack these orcs for no particular reason. In his mind. But Beleg's like, we can do it, though. You came from a stalwart people, the elves of Nargothrond. Remember, in this text, it's old enough that gnomes equal elves. They are the same. Thus Beleg the bowman quoth bold-hearted, but Flinding fought the fear of his heart, and loosed the light of his lamp of blue, now brighter burning. In the black mazes and wound they wandered, weary searching, by the tall tree boles towering silent off-bared and baffled, blindly stumbling over rock-fast roots, writhing coiled, and drowsed with dreams by the dark odors till hope was hidden. Hark thee, Flinding, viewless voices, vague and distant, a muffled murmur of marching feet that are shod with stealth shakes the stillness. No noise I hear, the gnome answered. Thy hope cheats thee. That's Flinding answering. I hear the chains clinking, creaking, the cords straining, and the wolves padding on worn pathways. I smell the blood that is smeared on blades that are cruel and crooked, the croaking laughter. Now listen, louder and louder comes, the hunter said. I hear no sound, quoth Flinding fearful. Then follow after, with bended bow, then Beleg answered. Yeah, then follow after. He's like, then follow after. Fine. With bended bow, then Beleg answered. My cunning rekindles. My craft needs not thy lamp's leading. Burn. Leaping swiftly, he shrank in the shadows. With shrouded lantern, Flinding followed him. And the forest darkness and drowsy dimness drifted slowly unfolding from them in fleeing shadows, and its magic was minished, as in diminished. And its magic was minished till they marveling saw they were brought to its borders. My word. There black gaping an archway opened. By ancient trunks it was framed darkly, that in far-off days the lightning felled, now leaning gaunt, their lichen leprous limbs uprooted. Ooh, that's a great description. Lichen leprous limbs. That's so good. So lichen is sort of a form of moss? ? It's parasitic, but lichen tends to attach itself to stone that gets wet frequently and also fallen trees. And it's parasitic, so it covers it and feeds off of it. but lichen can grow almost anywhere. It's actually a fascinating plant. Plant? Creature? Being? I don't even know. But lichen leprous limbs. Oh man, that's such a cool description. There shadowy bats that shrilled thinly flew in and flew out, the air brushing as they swerved soundless. A swooning light faint filtered in, for facing north they looked o'er the leaguers of the lands of morning, o'er the bleak boulders, o'er the blistered dunes and dusty drouth of Dor na Fauglith. Or that thirsty plain, that's what Dor na Fauglith means, to the threatening peaks, now glimpsed gray through the grim archway, of the marching might of the mountains of iron, and faint and far in the flickering dusk, the thunderous towers of Thangorodrim. But backward broad through the black shadows from that darkling door dimly wandered the ancient Orc Road. And even as they gazed, the silence suddenly with sounds of dread was shaken behind them, and shivering echoes from afar came fleeting. Feet were trampling, trappings tinkling, and the troublous murmur of viewless voices in the vaulted gloom came nearer and nearer. "Ah, now I hear," said Flinding fearful. Flee we swiftly from hate and horror and hideous faces, from fiery eyes and feet relentless. Ah, woe that I wandered thus witless hither. Yeah, and here Flinding is a bit of a coward. He's not quite so bad in the Silmarillion, but here he's definitely a coward. Yeah, great fire starter. Wonderful point about lichen. Lichen does make a great fire starter. Just makes me think of the fire starter song from Prodigy. I'm old. So Flinding / Gwyndor is like, why did I come here? I don't wanna. Then beat in his breast, foreboding evil, with dread unwonted, the dauntless heart of Beleg the Brave. With blanched cheeks in faded fern, and the feathery leaves of brown bracken they buried them deep. Where dank and dark, a ditch was cloven on the wood's borders by waters oozing, dripping down to die in the drought below. Yet hardly were they hid, when a host to view round a dark turning in the dusky shadows, came swinging sudden with a swift thudding of feet after feet on fallen leaves. So, round a corner is coming an orc host. On the fire starter, twisted fire starter. Ow! You know what I'm talking about. Melkor's national anthem. I mean, you're not wrong. Firestarter could be sort of like Melkor and Sauron's. Oh, hi kitten. Hello. You can't go in there. The system is down. Go on. Sorry, kitten bit. I blocked her favorite spot to sit on the desk. She was like, She's like, why'd you put stuff there? That's my spot. Okay, where was I? Okay, so round the corner is coming a host of orcs, feet after feet on fallen leaves. In rank on rank of ruthless spears that Warhost went, weary, stumbling, countless captives, cruelly laden with blood-stained booty, in bonds of iron they hailed behind them, and held in ward by the wolf riders and the wolves of hell. Their road of ruin was areek with tears, many a hall and homestead, many a hidden refuge of gnome lords. Excuse me. That came on suddenly. What just happened? My throat very suddenly got wicked dry. Okay, moving on, sorry. Many a hall and homestead, many a hidden refuge of gnomish lords by night beleaguered, their o'ermastering might of mirth bereft, and fair things fouled, and fields curled with the bravest blood of beaten people. To an army of war was the orc band waxen, that Blodrin, Bor's son, to his bane guided to the wood marches, by the welded hosts homeward hurrying to the halls of morning, swiftly swollen to a sweeping plague. Like a throbbing thunder in the threatening deeps of cavernous clouds, o'ercast with gloom, now swelled on a sudden a song most dire, and their hellward hymn their home greeted. Flung from the foremost of the fierce spearmen, who viewed mid-vapors vast and sable the threefold peaks of Thangorodrim, it rolled rearward, rumbling darkly like drums in distant dungeons empty. Then a werewolf howled. A word was shouted like steel on stone, and stiffly raised their spears and swords, sprang up thickly as the wild wheat fields of the war god's realm, with points that palely pricked the twilight. As by wind wafted, then waved they all, and bowed as the bands with beating measured moved on mirthless from the murky woods, from the topless trunks of Tower Nafuin, neath the leprous limbs of the leaning gate. Then Beleg the bowman, in bracken cowering, on the loathly legions through the leaves peering, saw Turin the tall as he tottered forward neath the whips of the orcs as they whistled o'er him, and rage arose in his wrathful heart, and piercing pity outpoured his tears. The hymn was hushed, the host vanished down the hellward slopes of the hill beyond, and silence sank slow and gloomy round the trunks of the trees of Tower Nafuin, and nethermost night drew near outside. So he spies Turin in this orc host, but their numbers put them at a bit of a disadvantage there, so they watch Turin go out of sight with this orc band, and Beleg is pissed. Beleg's about to do something. Follow me, Flinding, from the forest cursed. Let us haste to his help, to hell if need be, or to death by darts of the dread Glamhoth. And Beleg bounded from the bracken madly, like a deer driven by dogs baying from his hiding in the hills and hollow places. And Flinding followed, fearful after him, neath the yawning gate, through yew thickets, through bogs and bents and bushes shrunken, till they reached the rocks and the riven moorlands and the friendless fells falling darkly to the dusty dunes of Dor na Fauglith. In a cup outcarven on the cold hillside, whose broken brink was bleakly fringed with bended bushes, bowed in anguish from the north wind's knife. Beneath them far the feasting camp of their foes was laid. The fiery flare of fuming torches and black bodies in the blaze they saw crossing countlessly, and cries they heard, and the hollow howling of hungry wolves. Hey there! Hey there, Kippy. Welcome back, Birdman. Alright, I feel like we're doing okay. It's not an easy poem to read, and I'll say that a million times. It's a tongue twister, every single line. Then a moon mounted o'er the mists riding, and the keen radiance of the cold moonshine the shadows sharpened in their sheer hollows, and slashed the slopes with slanting blackness. In wreaths uprising, the reek of fires was touched to tremulous tremulous, my bad, the tremulous trails of silver. Then the fires faded, and their foemen slumbered in a sleep of surfeit. No sentinel watched, nor guards them girdled. That what good were it to watch wakeful in those withered regions neath Aeglir Engrin, whence the eyes of Bauglir gazed unclosing from the gates of hell? Basically, what's the point of setting a guard when you're already being, you're right before the gates of your realm? So, they're getting careless is what's happening. Did not werewolves' eyes unwinking gleam in the wan moonlight? The wolves that sleep not, that sat in circles with slavering tongues, round camp or clearing of the cruel Glamhoth. Then was Beleg a shudder, and the unblinking eyes nigh chilled his marrow, and chained his flesh in fear unfathomed, as flat to earth by a boulder he lay. Lo, black cloud drifts surged up like smoke from the sable north, and the sheen was shrouded of the shivering moon. The wind came wailing from the woeful mountains, and the heath unhappy hissed and whispered, and the moans came faint of men in torment in the camp accursed. His quiver rattled as he found his feet, and felt his bow, hard horn-pointed by hands of cunning of black yew wrought. So his bow is made of black yew wood. With bear's sinews it was stoutly strung. Strength to bend it had nor man nor elf, save the magic helped him that Beleg the bowman now bore alone. So it's a very, very powerful bow. No arrows of the orcs so unerring winged as his shaven shafts that could shoot to a mark that was seen but in glance ere gloom seized it. Then Dailir he drew, his dart beloved, how so far fared it, or fell unnoted, unsought he found it, with sound feathers and barbs unbroken, till it broke at last. And fleet bade he fly that feather-pinioned, snake-tongued shaft, as he snicked the string in the notch nimbly, and with naked arm to his ear drew it. The air whistled, and the tingling string twanged behind it. Soundless a sentinel sank before it. There was one of the wolves that awaked no more. He's a very, very good shot. He's a super good shot. Oh, thank you so much for the rose. Thank you. Now arrows after he aimed swiftly that missed not their mark, and meted silent death in the darkness, dreadly stinging, till 3 of the wolves with throats pierced, and 4 had fallen, with fleet-winged arrows a-quivering in their quenched eyes. Then great was the gap in the guard opened, and Beleg his bow unbent, and said, "Wilt come to the camp, comrade Flinding, or wait me watchful? If woe betide thou might win with word through the woods homeward to Thingol the king, how throve my quest, how Turin the tall was trapped by fate, how Beleg the bowman to his bane hastened." Then Flindling fiercely, though fear shook him, I have followed thee far, O forest walker, nor will leave thee now, our league denying. Then both bow and sword Beleg left there, with his belt unbound in the bushes tangled of a dark thicket in a dell nigh them. And Flinding there laid his flickering lamp and his nailed shoes. And his knife only he kept, that uncumbered he might creep silent. So they've put all but the basic weaponry aside so that they can sneak up on this band of orcs through the gap that Beleg now made with his bow, by very, very skillfully slaying a bunch of wolves. Right through the eye with his arrows. #skills. This story is so sad. I know. We're getting to that sad part. It's coming. It's coming. And if you've ever read the Silmarillion, you know it's coming. It's fine. It's totally fine. Everything's fine. Thus those brave and dread down the bare hillside towards the camp clambered, creeping weary, and dared that deed in days long past whose glory was gone through the gates of earth, and songs have sung unceasing, ringing wherever the elves in ancient places had light or laughter in the later world. With breath bated on the brink of the dale they stood and stared through stealthy shadows, till they saw where the circle of sleepless eyes was broken. With hearts beating dully they passed the places where pierced and bleeding the wolves weltered by winged death, unseen smitten. As smoke noiseless they slipped silent through the slumbering throngs as shadowy wraiths, shifting vaguely from gloom to gloom, till the gods brought them and the craft and cunning of the keen huntsman to Turin the Tall, where he tumbled lay with face downward in the filthy mire, and his feet were fettered, and fast in bonds anguish enchained his arms behind him. There he slept or swooned, as sunk in oblivion by drugs of darkness deadly blended. He heard not their whispers. No hope stirred him, nor the deep despair. Sorry. I skipped a bit. He heard not their whispers. No hope stirred him, nor the deep despair of his dreams fathomed. To wake his wit no words availed. No blade would bite on the bonds he wore, though flinting felt for the forged knife of dwarven steel his dagger prized, that at waist he wore awake or sleeping, whose edge would eat through iron noiselessly as a clod of clay is cleft by the share. So it's kind of cool to note that this is a dwarven forged dagger that could cut through iron as if clay. That's super cool. It was wrought by rites in the realms of the east, in black Belagost, by the bearded dwarves of Troth unmindful. It betrayed him now from its sheath, sleeping as o'er shaggy slades and rough-hewn rocks their road they wended. We must bear him back as best we may, said Beleg, bending his broad shoulders. Then the head he lifted of Hurin's offspring, and Flinding Gofuelin the feet clasped. And doubtly that deed, for in days long gone through, though men were of mold less might. Oh my gosh, why? Why, God? Okay, let me try this again. Okay. Breathe. Then the head he lifted of Hurin's offspring, and Flinding Gofuelin the feet clasped. And doughty that deed, for in days long gone, though men were of mold less mighty builded, ere the earth's goodness from the elves they drew, though the elfin kindreds ere old was the sun, were of might unminished, nor the moon haunted faintly fading as formed of shadows in places unpeopled, yet peers they were not in bone and flesh and bodies fashioning. And Turin was tallest of the 10 races that in Heathlam's hills their homes builded. Like a fog they lifted his limbs mighty, and straining staggered with stealth and fear, with bodies bending and bones aching, from the cruel dreaming of the camp of dread, where spearmen drowsed, sprawling drunken by their moonblades keen with murder whetted mid their shaven shafts in sheaves piled. So they're carrying Turin off. All of that to just say that they're carrying Turin off, okay? Oh boy. Now Beleg the Brave backward led them, but his foot fumbled, and he fell thudding with Turin atop him, and trembling stumbled Flinding forward, there frozen lying long while they listened, for alarm stirring, for hue and cry, and their hearts cowered. But unbroken the breathing of the bands sleeping, as darkness deepened to dread midnight, and the lifeless hour when the loosened soul oft sheds the shackles of the shivering flesh, then dared their dread to draw its breath, and they found their feet in the fouled earth, and bent they both their backs once more to their task of toil, for Turin woke not. There the huntsman's hand was hurt deeply, as he groped on the ground by a gleaming point. 'Twas Dailir, his dart dearly prized. He had found by his foot in fragments twain, and with barbs bended, it broke at last 'neath his body falling. It boded ill. So basically, as they're going away from the orc band, Beleg sort of trips, and as he falls, he hurts himself because a weapon sort of shatters, and so the fragments are cutting into him. As in dim dreaming and dazed with horror, they won their way with weary slowness, foot by footstep, till fate them granted the leaguer at last of those layers to pass, and their burden laid they, breathless, gasping, on bare-bosomed earth, and abode a while, ere by winding ways they won their path up the slanting slopes with silent labor, with spended strength sprawling to cast them at the darkling dell 'neath the deep thicket. Then sought his sword, and songs of magic o'er its eager edge, with elfin voice there Beleg murmured, while bluely glimmered the lamp of Flinding 'neath the laced thorns. There wondrous wove he words of sharpness, and the names of knives and gnomish blades he uttered o'er it. Even Ogbar's spear, and the glaive of Gaurin, whose gleaming stroke did rive the rocks of Rodrim's hall, the sword of Scythnar, and the silver blades of the enchanted children of chains forged of their deep dungeon, the dirk of Nargil, the knife of the north in Nogrod smithied, the sweeping sickle of the slashing tempest, the lambent lightning's leaping falchion, even Keleg Eithor, that shall cleave the world. So basically just saying this is a badass weapon. More badass than all other weapons. Then whistling whirled he the whetted sword blade, and 3 times 3 it threshed the gloom, till flame was kindled, flickering strangely like licking firelight in the lamp's glimmer, blue and baleful at the blade's edges. Lo, a leering laugh, lone and dreadful, by the wind wafted, wavered nigh them. Their limbs were loosened in listening horror. They fancied the feet of foes approaching, for the horns hearkening of the hunt afoot in the rustling murmur of roving breezes. Then quickly curtained with its cowering pelt was the lantern's light, and leaping, Beleg with his sword severed the searing bonds on wrist and arm, like ropes of hemp so strong that wetting. In stupor lying entangled still lay Turin moveless. For the feet's fetters, then feeling in the dark, Beleg blundering with his blade's keenness, unwary, wounded the weary flesh of wayward foot, and welling blood bedewed his hand, too dark his magic. That sleep profound was sudden fathomed. In fear woke Turin, and a form he guessed o'er his body bending with blade naked. His death or torment was deemed his death or torment he deemed was come, for oft had the orcs, for evil pastime, him goaded gleeful and gashed with knives, that they cast with cunning. With cruel spears, the bonds were burst that had bound his hands. His cry of battle, calling hoarsely, he flung them fiercely on the foe he dreamed. And Beleg, falling breathless earthward, was crushed beneath him. Crazed with anguish, then seized that sword the son of Húrin, to his hand lying by the help of doom. At the throat he thrust, through he pierced it, that the blood was buried in the blood-wet mold. Ere Flinding knew what fared that night, all was over. With oath and curse he bade the goblins now guard them well, or sup on his sword. Lo, the son of Húrin is freed from his fetters! His fancy wandered in the camps and clearings of the cruel Glamhoth. Flight he sought not, at Flinding's leaping with his last laughter, his life to sell amid foes imagined. But Fuilin's son, there stricken with amaze, starting backward, cried, Magic of Morgoth! Ah, madness damned! With friends thou fightest! Then falling suddenly, the lamp o'erturned, in the leaves shrouded, that its light released, illumined pale, with its flickering flame, the face of Beleg. Then the boles of the trees, more breathless, rooted, stone-faced, he stood, staring, frozen, on that dreadful death, and his deed, knowing, wild-eyed, he gazed with waking horror, and, as in endless anguish, an image carven. So fearful his face that Flinding crouched and watched him, wondering what webs of doom dark, remorseless, dreadly meshed him by the might of Morgoth. And he mourned for him, and for Beleg, whose bow should bend no more. His black yew-wood in battle twanging, his life had winged to its long waiting in the halls of the moon or the hills of the sea. It's really sad. So in case any of that was difficult to follow, as they were cutting the bonds off of Túrin's feet, Beleg accidentally cut Beleg's flesh, and it woke him suddenly, and in that fugue state, Túrin just slayed Beleg. And in this version, it's pretty gruesome, like, literally through his friend's throat. Like, it's not even just mad swinging, like, he slashed through. That's not good. Oh, it's so sad. Hark! He heard the horns hooting loudly, no ghostly laughter of grim phantom, no wraith-like feet rustling dimly. The orcs were up. Their ears had hearkened to the cries of Túrin. Their camp was tumult. Their lust was alight ere the last shadows of night were lifted. Then, numb with fear, in hoarse whisper to unhearing ears, he told his terror. For Túrin, now with limbs loosened, leaden-eyed, was bent, crouching, crumpled by the corse, moveless. Nor sight nor sound his senses knew, and wavering words he witless murmured. Ah, Beleg, he whispered, my brother in arms. Though Flinding shook him, he felt it not. Had he comprehended, he had cared little. Then winds were wakened in wild dungeons, where thrumming thunders throbbed and rumbled. Storm came striding with streaming banners from the four corners of the fainting world. Then the clouds were cloven with a clash of lightning, and slung like stones from slings uncounted, the hurtling hail came hissing earthward, with a deluge dark of driving rain, now wafted high, now wavering far. The cries of the Glamhoth called and hooted, and the howl of wolves in the heavens roaring was mingled mournful. They missed their paths, for swollen swept their swirling torrents down the blackened slopes, and the slot was blind. so that blundering back up the beaten road to the gates of gloom, many goblins, wildered were drowned or drawn in deadly nightshade to die in the dark. While dawn came not, while the storm riders strove and thundered all the sunless day, and soaked and drenched Flinding Gofuilin, with fear speechless there crouched a quake. Cold and lifeless lay Beleg the bowman, brooding dumbly. Turin Thalion, neath the tangled thorns, sat unseeing without sound or movement. The dusty dunes of Dorn Fauglith hissed and spouted. Huge rose the spires of smoking vapor, swathed and reeking, thick billowing clouds from thirst unquenched, and dawn was kindled dimly lurid when the day and night had dragged away. The orcs had gone, their anger baffled, o'er the weltering ways weary faring to their hopeless halls in Hell's kingdom. No thrall took they Turin Thalion. A burden bore he than their bonds heavier, in despair fettered, with spirit empty, in mourning hopeless, he remained behind. Thus ends part 2. And thus ends Beleg Cuthalion. Such a cool elf and such a terrible death. How horrifying for everyone involved. The one pity there, I guess, or the one mercy, not pity. The one mercy I think in this whole situation is that Beleg died fast. That was not a lingering, slow, painful death. But gosh, I feel bad for Gwyndor / Flinding in here. Flinding. Watching all this suddenly go down and not being able to stop any of it. But poor Turin. The moment he finally comes to his senses and realizes that he's been fighting his friends and not just more foes of the enemy. It's so sad. But that's part 2. So next stream we will cover part 3, and I think there's a little tiny hint of an extra bit. Let me double check here. Geography. Okay, so next stream is part 3 of the Children of Húrin, and then we'll see how we're feeling here. But there is a second draft of the Children of Húrin. But again, it only goes so far, because we only get part 3, which is Fælivrin. And then there's just a note at the end of that. So at the end of the Fælivrin, the part 3, which we'll cover next week, it simply ends with, here both A and B end abruptly, and I think it is certain that no more of the poem was ever written. And that's just a note from Christopher Tolkien, who compiled all of these into the history of Middle-earth. So we've been reading the first draft, basically, of the Children of Húrin. And if you guys want to, after we finish part 3 next time, we can also cover the second draft. Because it's a little bit more refined, if you will. But yeah, the second draft is only a little over 800 lines long, so it's a lot shorter. And that's about how much we read today. About 800 lines. So next week we'll cover part 3, and if you guys want to, we will definitely cover the second draft of the Children of Húrin, and then the week following that we can start on the Lay of Leithian, which is the Beren and Luthien story. And you can tell how many chapters there are. There are quite a few chapters to that one. We'll cover 2, sometimes 3 chapters each stream once we hit the Lay of Lathian. They go a bit faster. So, I think that's it for today. Relatively short stream. Thank you guys for your patience in the middle there when I went to help my mom. But hopefully you guys are enjoying these. I love reading the poetry, even though reading it aloud is a challenge. It totally is. But I love the poems so much, and they don't get any attention, really. Most people just want to read the Silm and then be done with it. Oh, thanks, Mikey. I appreciate that. Poor Turin. And, you know, stuff only gets worse with him. Which, once we read the last section, I'll try and do a little summary of what happens later on in his life, because certainly his whole story is not told in the poetic version. I think Tolkien started it, and then he just sort of stopped. I think he formed the rest of the story and put it in prose format in the Silmarillion instead. So he just sort of abandoned the Lay of the Children of Húrin. But just getting a taste for his poetry. I think the Children of Húrin is a little bit more difficult to read aloud, versus the Lay of Lathian, it's paired couplets, so those tend to go a lot more easily. Turin needs a psychologist. Yeah, no kidding. Turin needs therapy. So much therapy. That poor guy. Who doesn't need therapy? Gosh, Gwyndor would need therapy, for goodness sake. Poor Gwyndor. Gwyndor watched his brother, who had been blinded, get, you know, pushed out onto the battlefield, and then had all 4 of his limbs cut off, and he's just left to die in the field. Like, Gwyndor saw that happen. I mean, poor Gelmir, his brother. But Gwyndor went through that trauma, got inside Angband. He was so pissed off by it that he jumped the gun, which was not good, but he stormed the troops at the Nirnaeth Arnodiad, the 5th battle, and he got all the way inside Angband. Like, he slew everybody all the way inside. But of course, by the time he got in there, he had, you know, pinned himself with foes all around, and so all of his people were slain, except him. But Gwyndor is held captive for, I think it's between 17 and 20 years? I think it's 17, but I could be wrong. So it's like 17 or 18 years that he's held captive, and he finally escapes. In one version of the skirmish where he escapes, it's told that he lost his left hand. So he loses a hand, which seems to be a theme with those captured by Morgoth. Because poor Maedhros has to get his hand cut off in order to be saved too. But Gwyndor loses his left hand, and he is very aged after his ordeal when he's been put to work in Angband for years. So he finds Turin, he witnesses all of this stuff go down where Turin slays his best friend. Gwyndor's like, but he pulls himself together. He does pull himself together, because he takes Turin, who is absolutely in a state of shock. Gwyndor takes Turin and brings him back to Nargothrond, which ends up biting him in the ass, but, you know, he does get his shit together and try to help. So Gwyndor might not be the bravest, especially in this version, where he's just cowering and, you know, much diminished from his former self, I would say. But in the proper Silmarillion and in the standalone story, I think he's a bit more of a sympathetic character. He's one of my favorites, but I'm biased. I used to use Gwyndor in a bunch of fanfiction, so that's just me. So I think that's it for today. Thank you guys once again for enjoying the poetry with me, and definitely stay tuned. There will be a couple different streams coming up this week. There will be Hobbit Hump Day, so if you want to listen to me read The Hobbit, sometimes with crazy accents, which I hope I don't completely butcher, definitely check out my stream on Wednesday. It tends to be about the same time of day as this stream, so This past one was much later than intended, but I tend to do things late morning, early afternoon. Local time for me, which is Pacific at the moment. So Pacific US time. So hopefully you guys can enjoy a bit more of The Hobbit with me this week on Wednesday. And I'll probably do an ASMR stream and maybe another crafting cross-stitch stream. So the cross-stitch ones are just Stitch and Bitch. It's just chilled chatting with me and you as I work on my crafting. And the ASMR stream is going to be a late night stream. So those tend to be pretty late. Again, in my local time, which is Pacific. So if you're having trouble sleeping, you can catch the ASMR strips. And the replays are always posted up automatically on YouTube, so if you ever want to catch one of the ASMR streams, you can rewatch them. There's a lot of humming and whispering in Elvish and other triggers that I've been working with. So hopefully you guys enjoy that, and I'm always happy to get feedback on the lives when it comes to the ASMR stuff, because I'm just starting out with it. So thank you guys again, and I will see you guys at the very least on Wednesday to continue with The Hobbit. So thank you for joining these reading streams. I will see you guys next week. Bye guys!